It was just another quiet night in the small town of Harrington. The streets were empty, the houses dark except for the faint glow of porch lights. But in the heart of the town, something sinister was stirring. Rachel Anderson was finishing her late shift at the diner, wiping down the counter and preparing to close for the night. She had grown up in Harrington, a place that was usually safe, predictable, boring, even. But that night, something felt different. Before we dive into this gripping story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you love stories packed with mystery and drama, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. There's so much more coming your way. She felt it before she saw him, the presence of someone watching her. Her instincts kicked in. She glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual crowd of late-night stragglers sitting at the booths, nursing their cups of coffee. But there was a man, sitting in the corner booth by the window, his face obscured by the darkness. His posture was unnervingly still, as though he were waiting for something. Rachel tried to shake off the feeling of unease that crawled up her spine. It was late. She was tired. Probably just paranoia. But then he stood up. The man moved silently toward the door, and as he passed her, he glanced at her with eyes that seemed too cold, too calculating. Rachel froze, her breath catching in her throat. His eyes locked onto hers, a fleeting moment that felt far too long. She had no idea why, but something about him unsettled her deeply. It was as though he knew something she didn't. "Good night," he said, his voice soft, almost too soft, like a whisper meant only for her. Rachel's pulse quickened. "Good night," she managed to reply, but the words felt hollow. The door slammed behind him as he left, and she was left standing there, her heart racing. The next morning, the news hit like a gut punch. A local woman, Emily Harris, had gone missing. She was last seen the previous evening at the same diner, right around the time Rachel had noticed the strange man. The police had no leads, no clues. Emily's disappearance was a mystery. Rachel's mind raced. Could it be a coincidence? She tried to shake the thought, but the image of the man's cold eyes haunted her. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. She had to know more. She had to find out if there was any connection between the stranger and Emily's disappearance. But what could she do? She was just a waitress. She had no training, no experience with things like this. She had always been the quiet, ordinary girl, nothing special. But now, she felt like she was being dragged into something much bigger than herself. Rachel decided to go to the police station the next day. She wasn't sure what she hoped to accomplish. Maybe they'd have more information. Maybe they'd tell her she was just imagining things. Detective Alex Carter was at his desk when Rachel walked in. He didn't look surprised to see her. Rachel had known him since childhood, but their paths had never crossed much. "What can I do for you, Rachel?" he asked, his tone casual, as if he was used to townsfolk popping in with their concerns. I think I saw something last night," Rachel said, her voice trembling slightly. "A man. He was at the diner. He left right before Emily disappeared." Detective Carter didn't respond immediately. He studied her, his brow furrowed. "You think this man had something to do with Emily's disappearance?" Rachel nodded, the words heavy on her tongue. "I don't know. I've never seen him before. But something about him. It was like he was waiting for something." Carter leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. "Do you remember anything else? Anything unusual about him?" Rachel paused, trying to recall the fleeting details. "He was tall, thin, dark hair. He had this cold stare. And when he left, he said something strange. Like he knew me. Like he knew something was going to happen." Detective Carter stood up and walked over to a board covered in photos of missing persons and case files. He scanned through them, his fingers pausing on one of the photos, a man with cold eyes staring back at him. "The same man. This guy," Carter said, turning to Rachel, "was involved in a similar case a few months ago. Another missing person. But he was never caught. His name is Jared Walker." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened to him?" "We don't know," Carter said, his voice tight. "But he's been connected to several disappearances over the years. No one ever seems to remember much about him. It's like he's a ghost. Rachel couldn't shake the thought of Jared Walker. The more she thought about him, the more she realized how much of a presence he had in the town's forgotten history. The disappearances, the strange occurrences, no one had ever connected the dots. But now, everything seemed to be falling into place. She needed to learn more about Jared Walker. But she didn't know where to start. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, the phone rang. She picked it up, her heart pounding. "Rachel? It's Alex," the voice on the other end said. "You need to come to the station. We found something." Rachel arrived at the station, her mind racing. What had they found? Was there more to this than she thought? When she walked in, Carter was waiting for her, a folder in hand. "We've been digging into Jared's background," Carter said, opening the folder. "And there's something you need to see." He slid a photo across the desk. It was of a young woman, someone Rachel recognized immediately. Her name was Claire Jenkins, and she had gone missing years ago. But the photo didn't show Claire as she remembered her. It was an old-school picture from when they were children, and in the background, standing behind her, was Jared Walker. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "You knew Claire?" Carter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel nodded, her hands trembling. "She was my best friend, before she disappeared." Carter leaned in. "Rachel, this isn't just about Emily. This goes back further. Jared's been involved in a string of disappearances, ones that go unnoticed even by the police. He's been here in Harrington for years, and no one ever connected the dots." Rachel's mind reeled. All the pieces were starting to fit together. Jared wasn't just a random stranger, he was a part of the town's dark past, a past that no one wanted to acknowledge. But now, Rachel was caught in the middle of it. She was the key. She had seen him. She had witnessed something, and she couldn't walk away now. The pieces were coming together, but the danger was only escalating. Rachel wasn't safe anymore. Jared had been watching her, and now she was part of his twisted game. The town of Harrington, once so familiar, had become a place full of shadows and hidden truths. Rachel knew the only way to stop Jared, and to save herself, was to expose everything. But that meant taking risks. It meant confronting the past, confronting the fear that had always lurked beneath the surface. Would she have the courage to face Jared once and for all? And would she be able to escape the nightmare that had ensnared her? Rachel couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her bed, her mind racing with the newfound knowledge about Jared Walker and the dark secrets that had been buried in Harrington for years. There was no turning back now. She was already too deep in it. She had to do something. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jared was always watching. Every creak of the floorboards, every movement outside her window made her heart race. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The weight of the past was bearing down on her, suffocating her. She could no longer ignore the truth. Jared wasn't just a random stranger. He was part of something much larger, something that had been hidden from the public eye for decades. A pattern of disappearances. A cycle of destruction. And Rachel had unwittingly become his next target. Rachel decided to take a different approach. She couldn't do this alone. She needed help. But who could she trust? The only person she knew who had a personal connection to Jared was Claire's family. Claire's father, Carl Jenkins, had never given up on searching for his daughter. He'd spent years chasing dead ends, but Rachel knew he'd never stopped believing Claire was still out there. Rachel went to Carl's house the next morning. It was a modest, worn-down house at the edge of town, a place that still smelled faintly of stale coffee and old newspapers. Carl was sitting at the kitchen table when Rachel walked in. His face, weathered by years of searching, softened when he saw her. "Rachel," he said quietly, standing to greet her. "I never thought I'd see you again." "I never thought I'd be back here either," Rachel replied, swallowing the lump in her throat. "But we need to talk." Carl gestured for her to sit. His eyes held a glimmer of hope, hope that he hadn't abandoned completely, despite the pain he'd endured. "I've been digging into Jared Walker," Rachel began, telling Carl everything she had discovered. From his cold eyes to his involvement in the disappearances, to the connection he had to Claire's case. The more Carl listened, the paler he became. "He's been watching me," Rachel continued, voice trembling. And I think I'm next. Carl's expression hardened, and he leaned forward, his fists clenching. We have to stop him. We've been living in the dark for too long, Rachel. But I know one thing. Jared is clever. He always stays one step ahead. Rachel and Carl spent the next few days gathering what little information they could about Jared's whereabouts. They knew he was still in Harrington, hiding in plain sight. But where? The local police had been no help. They didn't believe Jared was still around, dismissing him as just another name on an old case file. They refused to entertain the idea that he had been behind the recent disappearances. The town's officials were too eager to move on from the past, to pretend like nothing was wrong. Rachel and Carl, however, had no choice but to dig deeper. They canvassed the town, speaking to anyone who might have seen something suspicious. The more they asked, the more they realized how little anyone actually knew about Jared. It was as if he had erased himself from the town's memory. Then, one night, Rachel received a phone call. Rachel, Alex's voice was shaky on the other end. You need to get out of there. Jared, he's coming for you. Her heart dropped into her stomach. What do you mean? How do you know? Because he's been watching me too, Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. He's been following my every move. I thought I could stop him, but I was wrong. He's smarter than we thought. I just found something that links him to the disappearances. The next day, Alex met Rachel and Carl at the abandoned house on the outskirts of town. It had been unoccupied for years, but rumors had circulated about strange noises coming from the place late at night. It was as good a place as any to find answers. When they entered the house, the air was thick with dust, and the floorboards creaked under their feet. The house felt abandoned, forgotten by time, until they stumbled upon the hidden basement door. The door was old, its hinges rusty. But when Rachel pushed it open, the sight that greeted her was nothing short of chilling. The basement was lined with photographs. Hundreds of them. Most of the faces were unfamiliar to Rachel, but there were a few she recognized. Claire Jenkins, Emily Harris, and others who had vanished without a trace over the years. But what made Rachel's blood run cold were the recent pictures, photographs of her. Jared had been watching her all along, documenting her every move. This is it, Carl whispered, his voice trembling. This is his twisted trophy room. Alex began rifling through the files, flipping through a stack of old newspaper clippings. Look at this, he said, holding up an article from years ago. Jared Walker was never caught. But there was a report of a fire at a house just like this one. He disappeared that night, and everyone assumed he had died in the flames. Rachel's mind raced. He didn't die. He faked his death, and he's been living in this town ever since. They had stumbled upon something far more horrifying than they had imagined. Jared had been orchestrating these disappearances for years, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, Rachel was at the center of his game. The final showdown was inevitable. That night, Rachel and Carl sat in the darkness of the old house, waiting for Jared to make his move. The air was thick with tension, and every creak of the floorboards felt like a death sentence. Then, as the clock struck midnight, they heard it, the sound of footsteps outside. Jared was here. They prepared for the confrontation, knowing that only one of them would walk away. Rachel gripped the flashlight tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the cold sweat dripping down her spine. A shadow moved across the window. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Jared stepped into the room, his cold, calculating eyes fixed on Rachel. You should have stayed away, Rachel, he said softly, a smirk curling at the corner of his lips. But now it's too late. The chase was on, and there would be no turning back. The house was silent now. Gunshots had rung through the air just moments ago, echoing into the woods like a war cry of justice. Rachel stood in the center of the basement, trembling, her hands shaking as Carl lowered the weapon he had just fired. Jared Walker's lifeless body slumped against the wall, his eyes wide open in surprise. His reign of terror finally ended. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, unnerving. Rachel stared at Jared's body, her chest heaving. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. Carl leaned against the wall, breathing hard. It's over, he whispered, though the words sounded uncertain. "It's finally over." Alex emerged from the shadows, having called the authorities just moments earlier. "Police are on their way," he said. "We have the evidence. All of it. He can't hurt anyone else." But as the three of them stood there, staring at the wall of photographs and names, the victims whose families would never stop grieving, Rachel felt her knees buckle. She sat on the floor, burying her face in her hands. She cried, not out of fear or pain, but because the truth had been so horrific, and for so long, no one had believed her. The story of Jared Walker hit national headlines. Serial predator found living quietly in Harrington for years. Victims' families came forward. Investigations reopened. Closure, long overdue, began to reach the broken hearts of dozens who had lost someone to Jared's madness. Rachel's testimony became central to the case. The photos, journals, and video recordings Jared kept were enough to connect him to at least 20 unsolved cases. He had operated in shadows, blending into communities, changing identities, moving just enough to avoid suspicion. But his obsession with Rachel had been his undoing. Claire Jenkins's remains were finally found, buried behind the old shed, just yards from where Jared had been living. Carl broke down at the sight, clutching his daughter's necklace like a lifeline. After all these years, he finally brought her home. Rachel didn't stay in Harrington. She moved to Denver and started therapy, needing time to rebuild herself from the trauma. She had stared evil in the face, and it had almost consumed her. But instead of shattering, she survived. She began writing a book, a memoir about the town's buried secrets, the pain of being silenced, and the courage it took to uncover the truth. She called it Beneath the Quiet, the Jared Walker Files. The world needed to remember what had happened, to see how darkness could hide behind the most charming faces, the most ordinary homes. Months passed. Rachel's life slowly began to settle into something resembling peace. Until one evening she received an anonymous package. Inside, a single photo. It was a picture of her, taken 2 days ago. In Denver. Outside her new apartment. No return address. No note. Just the photo, and the unshakable feeling that Jared Walker might not have been working alone. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Somewhere, out there, someone was still watching.